Yes, good morning. My name is Uche Ora Onwamebu. I'm with Aaron Fox Schiff in Washington, D.C., where my practice is focused on international disputes between governments and foreign investors. I sit as arbitrator mostly in those disputes. But today, I'm here in my capacity as a member of the board of the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center. I'd like to welcome you all to the Africa Technology and Arbitration Roundtable of the Center. A bit of background. I think it was on one of my trips up to the law school at Stanford some 4 or 5 years ago that Lester Schiffelbein, from whom you'll be hearing in a minute or so, or in a few minutes, and I started to talk about doing an Africa-focused event for the SVAMC. COVID came along and things were shelved. Then a few months ago, a member of the YP, the Young Professionals Group of the SVAMC, contacted me out of the blue from Nigeria, planning to do an event for Nigeria. And so Les and I had a discussion, and we thought it would be good to do something that goes beyond Nigeria. And so we thought about, why not Africa? Of course, as we all know, there's a bit of a challenge associated with that. Africa, with its 54 countries, different legal systems, cultures, legal business cultures, languages. There are over 2,000 languages in Africa. Nigeria alone has over 500. And so it's a bit presumptuous to say we want to do something covering the whole of Africa. And then we talk about technology. A very broad area indeed that touches on all aspects of human existence today. But then at the same time, it is the technology that makes it possible for us to all be here today, pushing down those boundaries that have kept us apart. And so here we are, trying to tackle a very wide subject over a very wide geographical area. To do that, we have a fantastic panel. It's a beginning of a conversation. This is something that we're going to be doing more after this. We expect to do something in person next year. But today we are starting a conversation. We have, like I said, a fantastic panel. Before we get to the panel, Amy Undercoat, who's a member of the steering committee of the YP group, who is co-moderating with me today, will say a few words, and then we'll hear from Les, who's a founding member of the SVAMC, and then we go on to our panelists. With that said, I'd like to welcome everyone, and I'll hand it over to Amy.
Thanks, Uche, and I echo your welcome. I'll keep my remarks brief because really we want to hear from you and what you have to say. My name is Amy Endicott. I'm a partner in the International Arbitration Group at Arnold & Porter, and also the co-chair of the Young Professionals Steering Committee. I was brought on board when that group started and have been working to move forward its mission, which is to encourage dialogue between people in the tech sector and people in the arbitration space so they can learn from each other and understand those trends. That said, we are very excited for anyone who is within that young professional set to join these talks, also hosted by SVAMC, and we have our own series of tech talks, which we encourage those interested in these topics to attend. So very excited to hear from you, and I will pass it over to Les.
Well, thank you, Amy. Good morning. My name is Les Schiefelbein. As Uche mentioned, I'm a founder of the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center. My background is I had a career with a aerospace company, a global aerospace company, Lockheed Martin, where I was the vice president and general counsel of the aerospace business, which included satellites and airplanes. And today I serve as a international arbitrator. Thank you, attendees. Thank you, distinguished panel members, for being here. Bill Seward, thank you for organizing this. And Amy and Uche, thank you so much for being moderators. I'd like to say just a few words about the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center. We are an organization that's about 6.5 years old. We are not an institution like the ICC or others who actually takes and administers cases. Our role is primarily to be an advocate for alternative dispute resolution in technical disputes, and to urge ADR and tech disputes across the globe. We are very excited, I must say, to have a panel with distinguished members from Africa. I must say we're a little behind the times in that we have done some programs in other sectors of the globe, but this is really an exciting program, and to have all of you present is just very fulfilling for myself and for Silicon Valley. As Amy mentioned, we have a very strong young professionals organization, and you can read about it on our website, or Amy, if you don't mind, they could contact you to get some additional information. Also, one of the strong points of Silicon Valley is we have a tech list, and it is a peer-vetted global tech list of individuals who do technology ADR across the globe. And we're trying to expand that tech list. We have a board of directors initiative, and we're trying to expand it, and we will internationally. And we'd love to have candidates from Africa who would be considered for our tech list. And if there are any of you who be interested, you could certainly contact me, and there's full information on the SVAMC website. So again, thank you. Amy and Uche, please, let's get started to the program, because the real stars are the panel members, and let's go.
Yes, so we will go on to our panelists. The idea behind the next step is to hear from our panelists to tell us about their business. As I mentioned, the tech sector is such a wide area. People are doing different things. And so it'll be good to hear from our panelists, who will introduce themselves and their businesses. Starting from we're doing this in alphabetical order by last name. So we'll start with Diamana.
Thank you very much, Uche. Lucky me. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, depending on where you are connecting from. So my name is Diamana Diawara. I'm the ICC Director for Arbitration and ADR for the Africa region. I took on this role back in January 2021, and that was when the department that I am leading was first created. So when Nesh is talking about coming late to the Africa region, I think you can add my organization to that, at least for a specific focus on Africa, although ICC obviously did have some strong ties with the African continent in the past. So primarily what my department deals with at the ICC is to work with our partners on the African continent to promote arbitration and ADR as a means of resolving disputes. We do a lot of capacity building work, in particular through trainings addressing both not only arbitration or lawyers generally, but all stakeholders, different stakeholders in the arbitration process. And that is from the young practitioners through the ICC YAF, all the way to the judges for the enforcement of our arbitral awards, passing through obviously the clients themselves, meaning legal departments, legal staff of African companies or African governments. The states are very important stakeholders in ICC arbitration and ADR generally. So a lot of our capacity building activity would focus on that particular group of stakeholders. So aside from the capacity building activities, we also do a number of conferences, and we do have a number of networks that allow practitioners from around the globe, and more specifically in my case from Africa, to get together and exchange on different current and developing issues in the sector of arbitration. And that's why I'm excited to be here today and have a chance to discuss the tech sector, which is a very broad one. I think we'll have a chance to talk about definitions and present to you, discuss with you the experience of ICC in that particular sector in Africa. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Diamana. Next, we go on to Victoria.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Keegan. I'm here in a representative capacity of the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration, which is based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a case counsel at the center. So my primary duty at the center is basically the administration of disputes through mediation, through arbitration, and other ADR mechanisms that would include adjudication and conciliation, among others. The center is also involved in collaborative projects, which I am actively involved in. Probably I just want to mention a few of them. One of them is a project with the African Arbitration Academy, other African and global arbitral institutions, negotiations on the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Particularly, I've been actively involved in its investment chapter. I've also been a participant in the UNCITRAL Working Group 2 meetings in a representative capacity of the Kenyan government and the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration. So just to give a brief background of the NCIA, it was formed by an act of parliament, the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration Act in 2013, and its arbitration and mediation rules came into force in December of 2016. So after the rules came into force, it became operational in 2017 and also in the same year, we received our first request for arbitration. So this would be the 6th year that the center has been operational, almost sharing the same amount of years that the SVAMC has been in operation so far, as mentioned by Les a couple of minutes ago. So apart from, in the sixth year that we have been active, we have seen an upward trend on the uptake of our services, which include, as I previously mentioned, the administration of disputes. More often we receive a lot of arbitration disputes and a few of mediation disputes. And apart from administration of the disputes, we also do training. So we have been training on ADR processes, particularly arbitration and mediation, for the past 2 years. And we also conduct moot competition and conferences for capacity building. So probably just want to say that it's also noteworthy that the NCIA is the premier arbitral institution in Kenya. We also have a Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, but it usually conducts ad hoc arbitrations. Thank you, and thank you for welcoming me for this webinar, and I look forward to discussing further on the tech sector in Africa, particularly on an institutional perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victoria. Next, we go on to OK.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? So my name's OK Okuzu. I'm the founder and CEO of Instrat Health Solutions. Instrat is a mobile health implementation company, which I founded in 2010. And the idea behind Instrat is that we can leverage mobile health, mobile technology to overcome the barriers that have been that have gotten in the way of healthcare delivery in low and middle income countries, especially in Africa. And the idea is that if information can be digitized, then it can be made mobile. And so if it can be made mobile, then you can bring democratization, and you can bring health information to the point at which decisions and improved healthcare at the patient level or improved policy at the institutional or the governmental level. And so we've leveraged the trends of increased mobile penetration as well as increased broadband availability to bring technologies such as patient level health records, mobile training and capacity building applications and services, health insurance management systems, as well as the use of artificial intelligence for disease detection and surveillance. Thanks for having me here, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, okay. Next, we move on to Lara.
Good afternoon from London, United Kingdom. It certainly feels today that I'm back in Africa because it is 28 degrees centigrade and 83 degrees Fahrenheit. Talking about Lagos, I grew up in Lagos. I'm a barrister of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, as well as a solicitor of the senior courts of England and Wales. I'm the Group General Counsel for World Remit, and I'm one of the 8 executives that run this business. Let me talk to you about World Remit. World Remit is an online remittance platform, valuation of $5 billion US. When we last raised the last round of $300 million US. Revenue generation about $500 million, and we move about $15 billion globally. It's an absolute privilege, to work with this organization, which was founded by a migrant, Ishmael Ahmed, based on basically the idea of making sure that as a mission for this organization, we're able to help our customers to realize their ambitions wherever that may be. I'm here today. I suppose I want to say that today technology is showcasing the might and strength of Africa. That is an absolutely privilege to see. When I grew up in Lagos, we knew Africa, Nigeria was great, but today technology is transforming, Africa. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to talk about the commercial aspects of the impact of technology and what it means for Africa and how far it can take us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Shola is next, and then we go on to Ziad after Shola.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to participate as a panelist. It's very humbling to be amongst the lot of you. My name is Shola Oyewole. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I work for United Therapeutics Corporation. We're a biotech company founded in 1996. We're publicly traded, about $11 billion market cap, $1.5 billion of revenue, and less than 1,000 employees. We have a portfolio of drugs that address a very rare disease called pulmonary hypertension. The only true cure is a dual lung and heart transplant. We've been developing these drugs now for the past 20 years, and for the past 10 years, we embarked on manufacturing organs. As we understand that, there's a dearth of transplantable organs in the world. You might have heard of Mr. Bennett that received a heart from a pig earlier this year. That was a pig that we manufactured using genetic engineering. I'm the Vice President of Digital Innovation, having worked at UT here as the last 23 years. And I look forward to engaging with the panelists and our guests this afternoon. And I'd just like to make a statement. Every business is a tech business. Every business is a tech company. Let's think about that. Let that sink in. From the person that's on the street hawking grapefruits, using electronic payments to receive payments, all that is enabled by technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Shola. And while we mull on that, we'll invite Ziad.
Thanks very much. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Ziad Suleiman. I'm currently the Chief Commercial Officer at EOH, one of the largest service integrators of ICT technology in South Africa, which also has an international presence. So if I rewind, I started out my career as a lawyer, where I worked in South Africa in practice for a while and then quickly emerged into the technology sector, setting up what was the opposition on fixed line telephony, and then quickly graduated into IBM. And in IBM, I looked after the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa as the lead general counsel, and thereafter got an opportunity to be the chief operating officer for IBM for the whole of Africa. And recently had the great opportunity and privilege of being asked to be the chief commercial officer at EOH. Outside of my professional duties, I also do a few important things for the country. I serve as the South African chair of 4IR in the digital economy at BRICS. I also serve on 2 presidential commissions, one around digital skills, and then the other one around public-private growth. So really, it's a privilege to share this platform with all of you and to share our learnings. For me, technology is the true enabler of where society is and where it's going. And it's how we utilize these opportunities to ensure inclusivity. And I talk about inclusivity in the context of Africa because there's no point in technology leaping frog and going way ahead of society and leaving a whole population behind. So we need to think about how we have a responsibility as leaders, to ensure that skills are adequately taken care of in terms of uplifting people, ensuring that our society and our small, medium enterprises, as well as large enterprises, have the best of breed technology for them to be effective and efficient and be able to operate not only in their local space, but also on a global platform. So really looking forward to the discussion, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ziad. And that brings us to the end of the first phase of the event. Next, we are going to go on to the...
Chair, I think you forgot me.
Nzilani, I'm so sorry. Blame it on technology. I'm so sorry.
Okay, no problem. Hi, everyone. I am really happy to be here today. My name is Nzilani Mweu. I am a lawyer practicing in Nairobi. I have been a lawyer for close to 11 years now, and 8 of those have been in technology, media, and telecommunication. A few years ago, I founded the law firm Relani Advocates, and it's a law firm focusing on technology. So we are in technology, telecommunications, fintech, and just basically everything related to tech. Of course, that comes up with other issues such as dispute resolution, as well as commercial transactions. And then I am also a co-founder of a startup from about 2 years ago. It's called My Comply Kit. And My Comply Kit is about helping small and medium-sized businesses in Kenya to comply with data protection laws. We had the data protection law come into effect in 2019 in Kenya, and right now we are in the process of implementation. There's currently data controllers and data processors are in the process of registration. And so we saw a gap where smaller businesses are struggling with compliance as well as affording legal fees. And so we provide a platform where there's a little bit of free information on compliance, as well as policies that businesses can purchase and implement in their own businesses. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for that, Nzilani. Nzilani was meant to be the third to introduce herself, but somehow that I kind of slipped up there. Amy is going to moderate the next stage, which is looking at these businesses and these different areas that people are in. We said, this is a conversation. We're going to look at what issues that tech businesses are facing, if any, and then after that, the next phase will be looking at disputes and how they are being resolved. I'll hand over to Amy now.
Thanks, Uche, and thanks everybody for the great introductions. And I really think it's so admirable, the commitment and the pride in what's going on in Africa. I want to just start our discussion by maybe grounding for our audience the incredible rate of growth and of technology in the continent. And one way that can be measured is through looking at the amount of venture funding and funding that is coming into startups there. So some may be familiar with Chamath Palihapitiya and Social Capital. It's a large fund based here in Silicon Valley, had put about $300 million into investments in Africa, but they're certainly not trendsetters. In 2020, Africa attracted $1.4 billion in investment and venture funding. That tripled in 2021 to 4.9 billion. And by some estimates, by 2030, people think that there could be 90 billion in funding funneled into tech startups in Africa. That's how much people believe in what's happening there, believe in the product market fit, the need, and the innovation in that sector. And it's really, exciting to see, mind-blowing, and part of what makes this topic so important to be talking about now, because we are at the beginning of an exponential journey. And in having that discussion, one thing that sometimes comes up is the way in which what's happening in Africa is going to be different, is going to chart a different path than that story that people are always hearing about Silicon Valley and growth there. Some of the challenges may be the same. Many of the players may be funding investments that took off here and now looking to Africa as the next wave. But we're excited to focus our discussion on aspects of development in Africa that are uniquely African, and then also the role that multinationals are going to play and have been playing in that development, whether we see that as a helping hand or potentially interference. So looking forward to that discussion. And I'd like to just go ahead and jump in with a question for OK. I'm curious, you've spent a lot of time in the region in a number of different roles. What do you think makes the development of technology in Africa distinct from how it's developed in other areas of the world?
Thanks very much for that question. So there are a couple of things that play. First of all, the legacy that we've all had to live within over the years is where, where things have been developed in the Western world, and there have been attempts to etc. What we're finding in technology is that those use cases cannot be wholesale transferred, because the use cases are specific to the people, the culture, the local practices. And so what this necessitates is that there is a significant local input into how these how these practices are adopted. And so as that local input has emerged and blossomed and now started thriving, what you're starting to see is that there's more local tech entrepreneurs, tech developers that have learned the development tools, adopted development practices, and now started developing technologies and applications that service those specific being introduced at a certain stage in technology evolution, which is really rapid. And the initial introduction to a lot of international systems means that we don't have legacy, legacy systems, right, to integrate with. So I'll give, a good example is in banking, where US banks in their transition to mobile have had to back integrate with legacy infrastructure systems, legacy compliance systems, and legacy banking systems. Some people even go as far back as paper. But in Africa, a lot of electronic banking, almost coincided with mobile banking, and so there was that leapfrogging effect. And so I think that that there are distinct advantages that tech entrepreneurs and tech developers have leveraged to push forward, in pushing tech development as a practice in Africa. So I'll stop there and let others share their perspectives. Thank you. You're on mute, Amy.
I'm curious for those of you who are also, and thank you for those comments, okay. And I know that is, it's such an important thing to acknowledge that different cultures use technology differently. And you can't just come into a local ecosystem and say, you're going to do things this way now, because that's how we've done them. I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts about how they've seen those differences play out and how they've strengthened or made more difficult the implementation of what you're trying to do.
Yes, Amy, it's Ziad. I can share some comments. I think cultural adaptation to technology is extremely important. And it's not just about culture, it's just about people, right? I think people have either a high adaptability and adoption to technology, or they have a high resistance to technology, depending on the way they look at it. So what we do need to do is we do need to ensure that human beings and technology work side by side, because there are certainly benefits and there's certainly education that goes with it. I think if technology is a threat, people are resistant. If people see technology as an enabler to provide efficiency and better outcomes, they'll definitely adopt it. I think the other aspects is also around price. When we talk about value and affordability, these are real obstacles and inhibitors in Africa, right? I think in the urban areas where large businesses and small, medium enterprises are looking to become far better, there's a great adoption. But if you go into the more rural areas where people struggle with employment, it's difficult to say, well, just adopt it. It's really a journey that you have to walk with people. So really, it's the lens from which you look, and the cultural adaptability is important. That's why I spoke about the inclusivity earlier on. It's making sure that the whole of your community and the whole of your society walks a journey. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to walk at the same pace. It's really all around, what works in your particular environment for whatever objective or purpose. So I'll share that. Thank you.
Thanks. And I see Laura, I don't know if intentionally, but you have your hand up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just very quickly, I think I can trace the development of technology to the adoption of mobile phones. Absolutely incredible. Last time, a long time ago, when I went to Lagos, I was so taken, by the fact that almost everyone in the local markets, everybody's got a mobile phone. And now we're at a stage whereby they're now moving on from the analogs to smartphones. And I think that has actually encouraged a lot of the huge, developments, that we're, having in, technology. I think it's incredible. But I will be very bold, to say that I will trace that, to the adoption of mobile phones.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that has been empowering in a number of economies, and it is striking. And the next generation is going to be, I think, even more integrated with that mobile phone technology. Watching my kids already play with phones, you're like, whoa, it's just going to be, I think, a quantum leap. Okay, did you want to add something to this part of the discussion?
Yeah, just real quick. I think Laura raises a really critical point. And that point that she makes is that the dominant computing platform in Africa is your smartphone. And while the world was waiting for the sub-$100 computer, it came in the form of a smartphone. And and what really made it affordable was when a few things happened. First of all, Google came up with a free operating system, which allowed hardware operators to provide lower cost hardware. And then China started manufacturing handsets. And then increasingly, India, Korea, South Korea, a few other countries. And so the cost of computing has come down to as little as $50 in some instances. So there's a huge adoption. And the second is the increasing scaling of mobile broadband. And along with that increased scale is the reduction in cost of communications, especially broadband. And so if you take these two, you see that the cost of computing has dropped significantly. The cost of communicating has dropped significantly. And so what then that does is reduces the cost of delivery of technologies. And commercial providers like ourselves are taking advantage of that, especially in the social sectors. Thank you.
So I see that Shola has his hand up too, and I want to just add a wrinkle to this, Shola, since you're at a company that operates in the US, but obviously in a number of markets and is quite far along in the development. Oke just touched on some innovations from Google and then from tech companies in China and how that has influenced and enabled the rise of technology in Africa. What do you think is the role of multinationals in this growth, and what kind of challenges or opportunities do you see being seated in the United States and then working in this market, advancing tech that way?
Thank you. I'd like to add to what Lara and Oke had mentioned. The rise of mobile technology, the rise of faster communications has kind of enabled African businesses, or Africans in general, to leapfrog, as somebody had mentioned at the beginning of our program. Now, that has enabled a lot of things, particularly in health tech, in which I am in. Today, a citizen can buy a drug from a street vendor, and using their mobile phone, they can verify that in fact this drug is a legitimate drug, not a fake drug, not a copy of a drug. Using mobile technology as well as telecom, they can also enroll in clinical trials. They can communicate with their doctors. They can have medical records stored in the cloud where it could be accessible from their mobile devices. Companies that are based outside of Africa will do very well if they partnered with companies based in Africa. What Africa has, Africa doesn't have the legacy of growing to where the countries in the West today have grown. We don't have the legacy of having to dig cables to each home in Africa for telephone lines or broadband. Everything is wireless. Lots of African countries take advantage of solar technology. There are many, many things African companies have taken advantage of the leapfrog effect. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think international companies outside of Africa can gain much more if they had a partnership with African countries.
And I want to invite Ziad to, and sorry to our panelists, I know we're jumping around our internal agenda a little bit, but just going with this topic, I want to invite Ziad to comment, especially given your experience working with IBM, which is arguably one of the largest multinational technology companies.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think the multinationals have played an incredible role, and they continue to play such a role, right? Whether they come from the US or otherwise. I think the amount of research and development that they do in technology is absolutely unbelievable. You know, if I think of IBM and the growth of quantum computing and what it does for all of us throughout the world, it's unbelievable. You know, when Shola speaks about the ability of having a smartphone with processing power that's equal to probably a 486 a couple of years ago, it's unbelievable. But then you take the smartphone being able to scale it and roll it out to a number of people so that you give them the ability not only to learn, but to operate and to trade and to do a whole lot of things. It's again unbelievable, you know, and this level of creating the unbelievable is what takes society and business forward. So for me, I think the role of multinationals is fundamental in us progressing as generation upon generation. You know, when I look at the US multinationals from, you know, Dell, you know, through to IBM, to Microsoft, to all of the others, the ability that they've given to people in different forms is really fantastic. So if you take a simple thing like, you know, OK was talking about Google, you know, pretty much everybody has a Gmail account, and that enables technology communication, right? That puts people in touch. The fact that we're sitting here able to do a Zoom call in a number of different time zones across a number of different continents is technology. The fact that you're able to operate your bank account without going into a branch anymore and allowing technology to bring the cost of banking down is phenomenal. A lot of these operating systems and these levels of technology come from the multinationals. The local service integrators utilize these technologies in order to enhance their individual businesses. So for example, in our business at EOH, we look after over 50 OEMs, right? And many of those are US multinationals. We fundamentally need those in order to operate our economy. I think what we are starting to see is the immersion of more and more technological trends in order to enhance our own businesses. So for example, if you think beyond just you know, a simple device, if you think about blockchain technology, you think about cloud data and AI, how all of that links, and the world of security, you know, all of these are technologies that are either started or fundamentally enhanced by these OEMs. So they have a really, really important role to play as we grow our economies and create opportunity for people for employment and for additional skills, etc.
So building on this, on the integration, but also, you know, Shola's comments about partnership. Laura, I'm curious what your perspective is on the role of M&A in this. So outside companies acquiring partners in Africa, as World Remit did with Sendwave, versus partnerships, and how the current kind of storm cloud over global markets you think might affect or direct that trend?
I think it's absolutely huge. And, you know, to your statistics, you know, earlier on, I think it's amazing, you know, the volume and number of investments, you know, that's gone into Africa. And that's kind of, you know, telling in terms of what investors are looking to do in Africa. Let's just look at why Africa is so important to the global economy right now. It's a populous continent. I think 2022 population about 1.4 billion. Nigeria is about 215 million or thereabouts. Africa, I can speak a lot about Nigeria, is generally a very, very cash-rich continent, more cash than credit. So if you're looking to, have a product, a technology, product, you can almost, guarantee that the adoption, will be huge. Now that we're at a stage whereby the technology economy is unstable, particularly in the West, I think it's more reason that we might see more cross-border M&A activity because it will be a time for consolidation. It will be a time for rich pickings, by investors, that have quite a lot of cash stashed away that they need to spend. And it just seems that at the moment, where, I suppose I can say it, the West is still a bit, because of inflation, I know that's global, but because of the war in Ukraine, the West is a little bit distracted. So it means that if you're looking to what you to do with your money, you're looking, to an economy, a continent, whereby you having, young people, and quite a lot of the population in Africa are sort of very young, people. And suddenly, because Africans have always found a way to survive, they know how to, sort of find solutions to problems. They're quite creative. They're quite entrepreneurial. It's just all of that combination, means that you have quite a lot of startup, businesses and organizations that are just looking for that investment. And I think there's a realization, and a little bit of maturity as well, that, if you sort of have that entrepreneurship, there are other things that need to go into it, in terms of making sure you have a handle on your compliance issues, in terms of money laundering, know your customers, and investments coming in to enable that would always be welcome. And any investor or VC or, private equity that kind of sort of spend time understanding what is like, the economy, what the economic drivers are in Africa, would totally be looking at making a lot of rich speaking still, compared to, trying to sort of do M&A in the UK at the moment. So I think growth of technology in Africa, I think there will be a huge role for M&A to play in that.
I mean, it's really encouraging to hear a positive word out of the global financial situation too. And that makes a lot of sense to me, particularly the hardworking and innovative nature of people in that space, which is also a great segue, because before we wrap this segment and move on to disputes, I did just want to ask Nzilani about her experience as a founder, and particularly in the space of compliance. And Nzilani, not to put you on the spot, because I don't expect you to be able to solve this problem, but Ziad spoke a little bit about inclusivity, and it's notable that of all of this funding coming in to the continent, 78% of that funding is going to all male startups, and only 0.6% is going to all female startups. And I'm just curious to hear in the minutes that we have remaining about your experience and what you would forecast. I know you're not in that space as much now, but what you think the future holds for founders and for women.
I agree that a lot of the funding is going to men, less than women. And particularly in Kenya, there's been a problem where, and not to put anyone on the spot, almost all the funding goes to white male founders specifically, and very little goes to women-led organizations. I think the future is pretty bright for women, because there's a lot more women who are coming out as founders, who are in the tech space, working in management, in executive positions. And there's a lot of recognition for those women. There's awards, there's organizations. For example, I'm a member of a Women in Technology group, where we just came together and decided to give each other a push. So it's made up of women who are founders, women who are practicing law in the private sector, as I am, women who are in top management and executive positions in tech companies. So I think it's definitely slow growth towards having more women take up more space in the tech sector, but with time it's growing.
That's exciting to hear too. I mean, I love the optimism, and I'm sure the world markets and investors are picking up on that. Here's a place that's ready to go and ready to take off, and I'm excited to be observing that and to be part of that in this small way. So with that, we're going to have to wrap this segment, although we'll have future programming. We really look forward to keeping everyone here in the loop. And I'll turn it over to Uche to talk about how arbitration might play a role in all of this.
Thank you, Amy. That was fascinating stuff, hearing about all the different things that the different people are doing. Not to pour cold water on our optimism, disputes happen. The purpose of the SVAMC is to encourage the use of arbitration and mediation alternatives to the court system. And so, in this segment, we're going to look at the disputes and see what issues people have come across and how these disputes are being resolved. there have been a few high-profile cases recently. Only last week, Flutterwave was hit by an injunction by the Kenyan courts. I think there were about over 40 accounts holding multi currencies that were slapped with an injunction for about 90 days. So that's going on. There was the big case between MTN and Nigeria. I think it was about $5 billion tax bill that MTN was hit with. A couple of years ago, I think in the middle of the pandemic, there was a big spat between Nigeria and Twitter. Now these are the high-profile cases, but there, as happens in other aspects of life, there must be other issues out there. So, with that said, what are the issues that our panelists have come across in this area? And if you haven't come across any, that's also good to know. But perhaps I'll start with Diamana, because you have a vantage point from where you can see quite a lot of what's going on the continent. Can you let us know what you're seeing in that regard, Diamana?
Sure. Thank you, Uche, for that question. And indeed, we often say that ICC arbitration, with the volume basically of cases that we administer, serves a little bit as a barometer of what is going on in different sectors. When looking at particularly the tech sector, in the volume of ICC disputes, it's interesting to note that, first of all, that sector, not just in Africa, but overall in the ICC administered cases, ranks as the 5th economic sector represented in all of our cases. And that is after construction and engineering, energy, transportation, and health and pharma, which was consistently previously ranked after tech disputes, but since 2020 with the pandemic, not surprisingly, it has surpassed slightly by just 0.2% the tech sector. So that is to say that technology disputes are actually quite present within the ICC caseload. And it's an industry sector that does generate a number of disputes that are referred to arbitration. Now, when you look more in details at the particularities of ICC arbitration cases concerning the tech sector in Africa, what we see is a variety of procedural profile, if I can use that expression. So these cases would concern financial stakes that range from very, let's say, small financial stakes, so around $500,000 all the way to a few, I would say, tens of $millions. We do have one exception with more than $100 million, but most of them would be in the range of, between 30 and 80 plus million US. These cases between 2017 and 2021 were, for those registered with ICC with African parties involved, most of them actually were terminated with a final award, meaning that they don't tend to settle. There are cases where the parties would litigate all through the end. We do have a few of them that were resolved with settlement agreements, either registered before the arbitral tribunal in the form of an award by consent or not. Some of them are just resulting in settlement between the parties directly. Another, I would say, interesting point looking at the particularities of those tech disputes within the ICC arbitration roster is the fact that a number of those disputes have to do with shareholding issues, and that echoes the point that was made a bit earlier by one of my co-panelists, in the sense that indeed, there's a lot of investments in the tech sector on the African continent, and quite naturally, a number of the disputes have to do with corporate issues and the structuring of the companies in the continent dealing with the tech industry. So these are some of the few characteristics that I can draw from an analysis of the ICC arbitration cases dealing with the tech sector in Africa over the period, the last 5 years. That's what I've looked at in preparing for this discussion.
Thanks, Diamana. I'll come to Victoria later on this to just close up this issue. But I'd like to hear from Lara, Ziad, and okay, and then later Nzilani on where do you see these disputes coming from? What are the triggers? Like I mentioned, it looks like there might be regulatory issues, especially with governments, but also, I mean, again, it's not just issues with governments. There are other disputes out there, commercial disputes. From your experience, where do you see the disputes in the tech sector coming from? Starting with Lara, and then to Ziad and okay.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, lawyers love disputes. Lawyers do without disputes. It's the main, I mean, that's what we live for. When you look at terms and conditions, and sometimes how commercial contracts, are drafted, is as if that is done on purpose, to lend itself, to disputes in one way or the other. So whilst you might have, sort of regulatory enforcement, that you need to, and usually you wouldn't, kind of sort of have arbitration for that, or sometimes, because it's an enforcement. If the regulator decide to, go against you, you may have a mediation or sit down with them and have a discussion about it. But from my perspective, I think it's, largely it's commercial. If I look at what Remit does, we remit to about, we have sent, licenses in about 50 something countries. And, we have received countries in about 150 or thereabouts, globally. Of course, World Remit is a UK entity, and in terms of our subsidiary in the US, also US entity, we can't, sort of reach all of these territories just operating, where we are. So we use a lot of networks, and we use a lot of partners, we use correspondence, and of course, you've got to have commercial agreements, and there will be issues around because some of the agreements, you pre-fund for the cash that you need to pay out to customers, and in some cases you post-fund. There will be reconciliations that need to be had. Sometimes you're not agreed, sometimes, you're so far apart, and then you're looking at, okay, how do we resolve this? Being a UK, US entity is not something that I say is fully developed, in terms of arbitration clauses, because you want to go for the easiest option, what gives you the choices and option, and how quickly, you can react, and get a solution. In some respects, arbitration is just as expensive as litigation. So horses for courses. But I can see the advantage as arbitration is maturing in Africa, to have that option, so that when you need to make the call, you're able, to do that.
Thanks, Lara. Before we get to Ziad, I just wanted to remind our audience to use the Q&A function to send in any questions that they may have. The Q&A function is you will find on the bottom of your screen. Ziad, if we can go to you on the same question, where do you see these disputes coming from in your sector?
So I agree with Lara, right? I think she's made a lot of good comments. I think from a commercial perspective, where there's contracts and there's business to be done, there's generally always going to be a dispute at some point. I think from my lens, I think when it comes down to service delivery, meeting times, making sure that the end, objective of what the customer is expecting is in fact delivered, is in fact where the disputes come from, because often there's SLAs. SLAs are very dependent on third parties, whether it be a regulatory environment or whether it be another service provider. And there's generally always delays in projects, and when there's delays, you ultimately have a financial sacrifice. Either it's costing more or somebody's got to pay the bill for whatever's going on, right? Or something has been paid for but doesn't work. So we're seeing a lot of disputes in these particular areas, and it largely comes down to reliance on technology partners, making sure that they have the right skills, making sure that the right bandwidth and connectivity is in play in order to do the switching and the connections, making sure that the uptime compared to resilience is absolutely spot on. These are all areas where the disputes arise. In addition to that, I think licensing and under-licensing is a big issue, and when you ultimately have a audit and a check from the licensing company, back on the environment, and you end up with a huge amount of overusage, there's a lot of fingers being pointed in that particular area. So I think that's an area which is prevailing and I think has been around for quite a while. I think the areas around IP protection is an interesting area because we're living in a global village right now. IP is being produced across the world. So if I give you an example, whether you're sitting in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, or anywhere else, you have developers developing all over the world, right? Whether it be Egypt, whether it be India, whether it be in the US. So, that IP definition of where it was created, who owns it, and ultimately who looks after it, whether it be, the developer, whether it be the company, is often at the center stage of disputes, not when things are going well, but when the company or the customer decides that they want to change service providers. So there are multiple levels of disputes arriving from multiple entry levels. And as the world converges more and more, I think the level of dispute just increases. But that begs the question of, how do we resolve this? And, as lawyers, we often talk about what is the jurisdiction, right? I mean, where do we actually have these disputes resolved? So, I mean, those things, even though you might have them in a contract, they do become blurred at some point in time. And there's a lot of discussion. So, without hogging the stage, I want to give OK a chance to go. But I mean, it's a fascinating area. And I think as long as we're doing business, we'll have disputes. And as long as there are disputes, there's areas of growth and stretching the legal community. So, OK, over to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Ziad. Yeah, what I thought was a very simple question, right? Obviously, as I listened to both Lara and yourself, obviously, it just really got very, very complex in my mind, right? And I'll tell you why. There are three constructs under which I unpack this question. And I don't think I'm going to do justice to the question, but at least I'll tell you the constructs and how it's tying up my mind. So first of all, technology in of itself is nothing, right? So technology is relevant only as it's applied to specific use cases, right? And so we're on Zoom. We're having a really great international discussion. People have used Zoom for parties, right? And that's a completely different interaction. So technology is, relevant, only in its application to specific use cases. And so what that starts to introduce in my mind is what are the sectors, right, that you apply technologies to, and therefore what are those issues that are involved in those sectors. And so so that then brings in a second layer, which is around, regulatory versus, say commercial contracts, right? Compliance. And so you look at, again, other than things like, technology, infrastructure laws, right, or regulations, right? Technologies have been applied differently to sectors. So the fintech, for example, right, or the financial services industry has very strong regulatory structures surrounding it. And so when you introduce technology, technology benefits from some of those regulatory structures. And so you have some inbuilt compliance mechanisms that then apply or get grandfathered into the technology dimension. In healthcare, for example, we sit at the intersection of healthcare and technology. And in healthcare, there are healthcare laws, right? And the technology laws have not quite been written as they apply to healthcare. And so, so we're very far ahead of technology, right, in healthcare. And so we're not seeing whether it's, compliance, regulatory compliance, or, the commercial disputes arise. So there's that potential. And so if you look at something like, there are other sectors that have different, applications, but I think that, across the board, there's almost a dissonance between the sector and technology, and therefore, how do you apply technology in the context of that sector? Now, the third area that just completely ties up the knot in my head is when you look at the complexity of the issues and the opportunities, there's almost an inverted pyramid where the issues that are of interest to the members of this panel and to not like also the audience is the big companies, right? So the big companies are the ones that are most the regulatory, the contracts apply more or more relevant to the large companies. However, it's the smaller companies that are the driver of the innovation, small to medium driver of the innovation, right, of the increased activities. But this is the segment that can least afford the regulatory compliance. This is a segment that will probably read contracts and moonlight as lawyers. And
I'll jump in. Sorry, okay. I'll jump in there. I didn't realize we only have 5 minutes left to go.
All right. So and basically,
then Nzilani Sorry.
Right. So I'll just say that this thing's all tied up in my mind. So I'll see if Nzilani can help
Sorry about that.
unravel them.
Yeah, I think Nzilani, and then we'll give the last word to Victoria. Shola can jump in if he wants to. But let's.
Apologies, guys. I think I started it off, with the lawyers in this case. Sorry about that, but I couldn't resist.
Actually, I'll pick up from what Oke said. And for me, the disputes are around 3 major areas. So obviously, there's commercial disputes. So that's around payments, termination clauses, rights of the parties. But the major ones are on regulatory compliance, because in some sectors, such as financial services, health, like Oke said, there is regulation and then there's innovation. So most of the players will be licensed, and then there's someone else coming in with an innovative solution and they do not have a license, or they do not fall in the area that is licensed. So for them to be able to operate somehow, particularly in fintech, they need to take advantage of another licensed entity. And so usually that's, if it does not work out as envisioned in the contract, it will lead to a lot of disputes with regard to, one party exceeding the mandate, or, the rights of the other party, or also issues raised by the regulator and end up in termination of those contracts. So I have seen a lot of that, particularly around fintech. In telecommunications, the sector is very is more advanced with regard to accommodating technology, but still there will be disputes around things like infrastructure sharing, traffic, support with traffic routing and all that. And then now the third major issue is around IP disputes, and mostly where it involves investors and startups. I have worked quite a bit with startups, and at the early stages, most startups will be desperate for investment, and they will look at the term sheets, and sometimes usually the term sheet is not binding. So what is in the term sheet will not translate into the actual agreement. And so as they start operating and working together, startups will realize they probably gave out too much, or the agreement was more in favor of the investor, and also because the startups will not have the financial muscle early on to engage legal support, so they get not really taken advantage of, but a lot of the time it will end up in dispute around their IP rights and just also their business ownership and how much they've ceded in the early stages. I hope I was fast enough just to see what the time.
Yes, you were. And I should mention that Bill has allowed us a few extra minutes. And while we listen to Victoria, Shola is standing by. Lara has her hand raised. There's a question in the Q&A, which I'll encourage panelists to respond to. If you're able to. So we'll go to Victoria, and then if Shola has something to say, fine. If not, Lara is standing by.
Okay, I think I'll give from an institutional perspective of the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration. So I think I had mentioned earlier that the center has been operational for the past 6 years. And it's only within the past 3 years, actually, that is 2019, that the center started administering disputes from the tech sector. And so far, it has formed 11% of the disputes administered by the center. So of this 11%, now the tech disputes that I've seen so far, 50% are from e-commerce industry. We have 30% of these cases from the fintech disputes, and then 10% from IP, and then another 10% from software provision services. So all of these have been registered and administered by the center. So the typical nature, I think I'll just typically mention two things that I've seen to be very unique, particularly number one, in terms of the dispute resolution clauses that we have seen in tech disputes. So I've seen three types. First, we have the general dispute resolution clause, where we have the clause is very clear, choosing the Nairobi Center to administer their dispute once a dispute is arisen. So of these cases, I've seen 70% of this kind of clauses. On the other hand, we've seen instances where parties' dispute resolution clauses did indeed refer to arbitration, but the appointment of an arbitrator was to be done through the courts. Because it said, well, let me give an example. If at all a dispute will arise, it will be resolved using arbitration under the Arbitration Act. If that happens, then you have to go through the court processes. But in these instances, I've seen that parties have prepared a separate agreement to the contract, forgoing the court appointment processes and choosing the center to administer its dispute. I've seen this instance in 20% of the tech disputes that we have handled so far. And then thirdly, I have seen whereby the contracts actually did not, the dispute resolution clauses were silent on arbitration or any ADR processes. And nonetheless, the parties decided to sign a separate agreement, choosing to have the NCI administer their disputes through arbitration. So in this instance, I've seen only 10%. Now, lastly, which is quite unique for tech disputes, or rather, well, it is acknowledged in many dispute resolution processes. We have seen clauses that follow the two-tier dispute resolution processes, always known as mid-arb. I think this would be whereby, they commence with mediation, and if mediation fails, they'll proceed to arbitration. This has only amounted to the 10% of the tech disputes we've registered and administered at the center. And then another unique thing that I have seen is it comes to the appointment of arbitrators. So particularly when it comes to tech disputes, the most nerve-wracking issue the parties grapple with in tech disputes is finding an expert decision maker. So arbitration provides such a platform where parties have an opportunity to nominate a qualified arbitrator. When it comes to the NCI experience, it has shown that the parties prefer choosing an expert of their own from either the NCI panel of arbitrators or an expert of their choice. The parties could choose to have a one panel tribunal or a 3-panel member tribunal. So in both instances, we've seen parties choose either that would be of preference to them. So it has been in exceptional circumstances that parties have not agreed on an arbitrator, and this is where the center appoints on their behalf. So it is also noteworthy that the NCI, among many other arbitral institutions in Africa, it works in collaboration with, have a list of arbitrators in the tech industry. In a collaborative effort, most arbitral institutions across Africa do share the expert panels as and when requested by the other. So this has ameliorated the availability of experts capable of dealing with disputes in different areas of law. So this is the experience we've had at the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Lara has her hand up, but Shala, if you want to say something very quickly, and then we'll end up with Lara.
So real quick, I am not a lawyer, but I appreciate all the legal input from all of you. I think what I'd like to harp on the most is intellectual property rights. Actually, the question I was going to ask earlier was, what percentage of the disputes have been related to IP? As a drug developer, as somebody that would be very interested in developing drugs in Africa, I think IP protection is very, very important for us. You know, medical devices, medical software, even medicines. So I really appreciate the feedback I'm getting from the lawyers on this call. But from what I've heard, it seems like there's an average of 10% IP-related disputes. And I think that is a good thing because it means the African companies are recognizing the value of their ideas. Thank you.
That's a whole big subject for another discussion. We'll get to Lara.
Yeah, thank you. I think Shola has actually made some of the points I want to make. I just want us to be absolutely crystal clear. There's no IP rights discussion. There's no compliance issue discussion without a commercial arrangement. There isn't. You know, there has to be two parties that have agreed to do something, you know, for a fee, and then to make sure that you protect each other's rights, you know, you have a contract that you set out each party's rights. So when we're talking about where you see arbitration come, you always have to come back to contracts, because the reason we all do this is because somebody has something that the other person wants and is prepared to pay a price for it. Those are commercial arrangements. So most of these disputes will be rooted in commercial, in a form of contract. I just wanted to make sure that we don't lose that, you know, lose sight of that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And this has really been a fascinating conversation. As I said at the beginning, the whole idea was to have a conversation started. We will be continuing the conversation. We hope we can count on you, and hopefully we'll all be able to see each other in person. This has been really wonderful. I'd like to thank, before we leave, Bill Seward and Annie Keaton, who've been working really tirelessly behind the scenes. They're the ones who made it possible for us to be here today. And then there's also a team, well, actually starting with David Edet. David is a member of the YP who's based in Nigeria. He contacted me out of the blue about this thing, and I didn't know him before. And, you know, here we are today. Then there is a team from Amy's firm, Diane Lake and Adam Masurovsky, who've also been working hard on this. Solomon Ezike at the World Bank is weighed in. Solomon has assisted us immensely this from his own time. He has no connection with the SVAMC, but he's been really devoting lots of time to this. And again, I can't thank our panelists enough. You guys have, you stepped up. Some of you at the very last minute. We're very grateful, and we will be looking forward to doing this again. Amy, Les, I don't know if you have anything to add. We're 7 minutes behind.
Just to add my thanks and to say that I hope we'll be able to continue this discussion going forward.
Thank you, and again, thanks to everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
All right, thanks everyone.